Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I am so excited about this panel. This is a fantastic group, and you're going to believe the same in just a few minutes when you get to know them. Equity, diversity, and inclusion has been a theme of this entire conference. We heard Bill speak to it so eloquently on the first day, and you'll get to hear more from him about that. We're going to start with an appreciative inquiry approach, as we heard from Lewis yesterday. You can see the bios of each of these panelists up on the screen, so we're not going to spend time on titles or education or background. What we're going to do is what we ought to do as we take this approach to learning about people as individuals and appreciating and respecting them, which is learning about them. So I've asked each of our panelists to introduce themselves by sharing a peak experience that made them optimistic about the future as it relates to equity, inclusion, and diversity. We'll start with Bill, and we'll work our way across. Bill, I know you're excited to share this story.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back to talk about this important subject. I guess the way I would describe it and introduce it and answer the question is to tell a bit of a story. So it was not a day unlike today outside, beautiful weather, sunny, 75 degrees. And I was walking on a farm in northern Idaho, and the farm was, 600 acres, not too big as farms go. And I was just enjoying the quiet and the beauty. And I tripped, and I fell pretty hard, actually, skinned my knee in a field. And the FBI agent that was with me, the special agent in charge, picked me up, and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm fine." And he said, "Look at what you fell over on." And it was a really large burnt cross in the field. And we were at the Aryan Nations National Headquarters after we had taken it over and closed it. And over to my right, on some of the buildings there, were our backhoes tearing the buildings down after they had done their work. The FBI had done their work. We were beginning the process of tearing the buildings down. And I've got this picture in my office of this large backhoe, engineers appreciate this, tearing into the top of one of the buildings with a giant swastika on it. And for me, with the agent, I said, I never thought that in my life, my humble life, that I would be here with you at the Aryan Nation compound on such a beautiful day.
I should have prepared myself to be crying in each of your stories because these are also personal and vulnerable. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
All right, Sydney.
Oh, that's a hard one to follow. So my name is Sydney Jakes, and I honestly believe there's certain moments in time that change us for the rest of our lives. And one of those moments came for me when I had finished 3 years of my civil engineering program, and I decided I didn't fit. I didn't feel like I fit in. There were only 2 women in the program, and so I decided I was going to be a math teacher and a basketball coach instead, because I knew I could do both those things. And I had already obtained an internship with the Forest Service, and so I switched my major, did a semester of math education, and I was happy thinking I'm going to be a math teacher and a basketball coach. And that summer, I went back to work at the Forest Service, and my bosses were trying to convince me to go back into engineering. And I'm like, nope, we need better math teachers, and I love basketball. And one day they sat down with me, and they just said, this is the thing. We don't want you to be like everybody else. We don't care if you get straight A's. We don't care if you're at the top of your class. You have communication skills. People actually like to work with you. We want you to be a leader over our survey crew because we trust you. We don't want you to be like everybody else. Please go finish your engineering degree and come be a leader with us. We want you just the way you are. That was life-changing for me, to realize I didn't have to be like everybody else. I could still be an engineer, but I could do it with a personality, and I could do it with community.
That was awesome.
See, Sydney is who she is, exactly the way she is.
And I coach basketball as a volunteer, but I am forever grateful for that conversation with those men that told me that I could be an engineer and do it my way.
Yay.
We're grateful for them too.
That was fantastic.
So Paul Pendergast, my business is located in California, in San Francisco, and if anybody knows Treasure Island, that's exactly where my office is located. And I think in the spirit of what gives me hope and what I find really exciting about today, and is the fact that really this is truly historic because in my off time, I'm an advocate for the LGBT business community, and not just California, but nationwide, and actually, as it turns out, globally. And I know that this is the first time that WASHTO, or probably ASHTO, or any transportation organization has ever included the voice of an LGBT business. So this is historic today, so thank you for the invitation. This is amazing. And I've got two little things of hope. One was one of the proudest days of my life as a professional was to see Pete Buttigieg appointed by the president to be the Secretary of Transportation, and to have an LGBT person in that spot, in this point in history, delivering on some very important projects for all of us, for all of our communities, is great. But earlier last year, Build Out California, which is the world's first industry association dedicated to architecture, engineering, and construction, we actually formed a historic collaboration with the AGC of California. Now, the AGC is not known for always being forward-thinking as much as we would like them, as I would like them. So, in fact, I think sometimes we could do better on every single front, women, minority, disabled veterans, and so forth. But we did a 21-point collaboration agreement. So not just a loosey-goosey MOA, it was really a 21-point collaboration that has outcomes and specifications for what we want to deliver. When we launched this, we got some national press because of E&R Magazine and Construction Dive, and all of a sudden, Peter Taishi's phone, Peter is the president of the AGC California, he started getting calls from his membership saying, we need to stick to our lane. We don't want to become too progressive. And Peter literally said, look, this is so important to us as an industry group and as the GC community. This is where the board wants to go, and if you can't get along for the train, perhaps we're not the organization for you. So from my perspective, that was such a huge leap forward because somebody actually leaned into the wind and stood with us. So that gives me great hope.
That's awesome.
Thank you, Paul.
Great. Thank you for having me here today. This journey for me has lasted a long time. In 1965, I was the third class of students to desegregate our school system in Riverside, California. And through that experience, I learned a lot of things. I was already in a school that was very well populated by people from every background. And I went to a school that was predominantly white in 1965. And it was based on our community fighting for us students to have better opportunities. And the barriers that I ran into then really weren't that apparent to me because I still could fall back on the people I lived with in our community. But fast forward to 1980 when I came here to Utah, and I felt like I was starting all over again. I did come here on a bus again, and I thought, you know, first of all, where is Utah? I determined I said I was coming here, you know, and I played football, so they bring you on a recruiting trip, and of course they fly you on a recruiting trip, and it's all fun, dandy, and you know, the guys are treating you right. But when I came on a bus, you know, once I left, you know, Southern California, and I was asleep through Vegas, I woke up and all I saw was farmland. I thought, oh no, what's going on? And I was here for about, I think, 6 days, and there were two black young men walking with two white young women at Liberty Park here in Utah, and they were assassinated. And I called my father and I said, you know, they don't want me here in Utah either. And he told me at that point in time, he said, look, no matter where you go, you're gonna have to show resilience. You have one of two choices. You can run, or you can find a way to be part of the change. So I decided at that time, even before school started, that I was gonna be part of the change. So I've been getting involved in civics, getting involved with our community groups, getting involved with business entities, just to make sure that I can be part of the change. and it's been very empowering, and I'm so glad to be here to share with you today.
Thank you, Sean.
Hi, I'm Angelo Papastamas. I work for UDOT, and in the spirit of Sydney and Bill, my fellow Greek, Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Thank you very much. Sydney, your story hit home with me real well. I call myself a plangineer. Engineer by trade, did a ton of hardcore engineering for a while, mostly do planning these days, and so I like the term plangineer, and I think it speaks to what you spoke to. So anyway, my what did you call it? My moment?
Peak experience.
Yeah, my experience. I've been working with interns and young engineers for a while now, and I ended up hiring an intern from social and behavioral sciences, and UDOT had never done that. They had never seen that. And I was talking to the kid and the professor. They're like, so why do you want to hire us? Why do you want to hire me? And I said, well, we want to change behavior. And my program is a travel demand management program called TravelWise. And we just came out with a quality of life framework through our UVision process at the time. And I said, I want to bring in someone different that doesn't think like engineers and come in with some suggestions on what we can do to change behavior. So it was a definite aha moment for him. He said, this is the most exciting internship ever. You know, and it really made me enthusiastic about it. So
Thank you. Well, I think it's probably obvious now why we have this panel. I appreciate all of your passion and your willingness to share. So we're going to focus a little bit today. D&I is such a huge topic, we decided to narrow it down just a little bit and to talk about developing our workforce and specifically preparing for a more diverse set of leaders for our future and as much as possible now. That being said, this is an open conversation, so I imagine that we'll wander down some other roads, to use a transportation metaphor. But the question I want to start with is, when you imagine the world 15 years from now, what do you believe will have changed?
Do you want to go in order?
Yeah,
Or
please.
general?
Yeah, jump in.
Jump in?
Yeah.
So I thought about this question last night when we had talked previously about it, and you know, for me, it's this was actually mentioned in one of the other presentations in a completely different context, but it's about the vision for me is conditional change, not just programs and plans. That the context within which we're executing our mission has fundamentally changed, and it isn't just about the people. And it isn't about just the processes. It isn't just about the funding and the programs and the planning, and isn't about how we not just communicate with our own staff, but with the communities that we serve, and we're sensitive to those things and all of the things we need to do. But all of that the entire context, the culture of organizations have changed so that it's second nature. We don't have to have, so many times we talk about this subject. And we talk about the fact that we need to start a conversation. We talk about the fact that we need to begin the process of making this change. And 15 years from now, I don't want to have those conversations. I just want it to be part of our organizations, part of our thinking, and really part of our individual choice that we make as managers, as engineers, as planners, as supervisors. It's just part of our condition as opposed to a program. So that's mine.
For me, when I think about ideal vision 15 years from now, I think in our world we talk so much about safety and physical safety. I envision a world where there's complete safety, psychologically, emotionally, where people of anyone and everyone feels completely safe to participate in everything. And again, both our employees and our communities, right? And for me, I just have such a passion. I mentor so many female engineers. 15 years from now, I hope that female engineers really honestly believe that they can be an engineer and a mom if they want to, that they can have a hybrid work schedule or whatever that means so that they feel like they can have balance in life and still pursue a career in engineering.
Well, I used to think when I was younger that 15 years was forever. Now I realize it's going to blink of an eye,
Yeah.
honestly. And I think we're really, from a workforce perspective, I think we're really at a very critical point in time. And I think the message that keeps resonating in my head is intentionality. If we do not intentionally act on creating a more diverse workforce that looks like our communities, it's simply not going to happen. We're going to continue doing the status quo. The Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority has started to roll out a brand new program, which is K-12. And the focus of that program is to help them understand the value of jobs in construction. And at first I thought, K-12, my goodness, that's way too early. No, it's really the aspect of the cultural change that needs to happen needs to begin at the K-12 level. So as a huge advocate for education, I think that we have an intentional job to do to shift the culture to make sure that our workforce, whether it's a public agency or a general contractor or a consultant or a small business, it's got to look like the people who are around us, who are benefiting from the projects that our transportation projects benefit. So intentionality is really what I carry away.
Great. I think about access. I think about understanding that this country's demographics, the way that we live, the places that we live, is constantly shifting. And we have to understand, especially in your positions, how to create a system that creates access for everyone so that people can live a viable life. They can have careers, and they can be mobile. We're going to start seeing changes in the way that fossil fuels are used here in the future. I'm fearful of the day that everything is battery controlled for me because I'm a little afraid of batteries. I work in the industrial industry and I know what batteries can do, but I know where we're going. And I'm afraid of technology because I know how to blow up a computer. They say you can't, but I know how to do it. But I believe that access is critical for us to continue. And I think 15 years from now, we're going to see that improvement with all of your help in the access to people from every different community, being able to be a resource and to be of value to our society. And that's going to be something that has to take place. And we have to do it in a way that we fully understand the elements that are involved in that. And that includes inclusion. That includes belonging. That includes just the understanding that there needs to be a structure of humanity embedded in everything that we do so that we have an understanding that we're working and creating pathways for individual success.
Well, I think you guys read my notes yesterday. Yeah. And so going last with this group looks like it's going to be really easy. And so I want to get into something, though, that DOTs have been saying forever, but I want to change it. Taking care of what we have. What if we still do that, but it's communities? We take care of what we have. We take care of our communities. We provide access to our communities. As Lewis talked yesterday, our communities need to thrive. What if our attention changes and our transportation focuses on our communities thriving? And so that's kind of what I visualize happening over the next 15 years. Our leaders take us in that direction. I think we're positioned there really well to do that. And so.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of another phrase that really stood out when Lewis was speaking yesterday, which is you can't take the eggs out of the cake. I think that awareness that what we do right now is going to have a long-term impact, even if we move the roads, even if we change things, the way that things are structured has that lasting effect on our communities. So thank you. And that leads into our next question. Well, I was first introduced to the concept of a Keystone Habit in Charles Duhigg's book, Power of Habit. And so the example that he uses is exercise. So if you want to get better at performing in life, we talked yesterday about how important food, sleep, and exercise are. So exercise is the one that is named as the Keystone Habit, because if you're exercising every day, you get tired by the end of the day. So you go to sleep. And you might eat more because you're hungry when you exercise, but it's probably going to be healthier because you're thinking about that. And so the question that I have for our panel is, what is a keystone habit or cultural characteristic that can lead to greater success on all fronts when it comes to DE&I? And Sean, I know that you were very excited about this one. He was like, I know what this one is. So I'm going to start with you.
Well, that's only because I have a story for everything. My Keystone Habit would be curiosity. And when I say curiosity, I'm saying the curiosity of the young. I'll tell this little quick story, and hopefully everybody will take it and understand where I'm headed with it. I was at a baseball game for my godson a few years ago, and there was a little 3-year-old boy standing in front of me, looking at me. He was staring at me continuously, and I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" And everything, and he wouldn't stop staring. And his mother, a couple of times said, "Hey, stop staring at him." And I was sitting with my entire family and my buddies, and this is a 10-year-old baseball game. And finally, the little kid asked me, he says, "Are you a chocolate man?" And I said, "Why, of course I am." And my wife started chuckling, and my friends started chuckling. The mother, of course, she was cringing at this time. But I was explaining to them, and I said it loud enough for her to hear, is that he had genuine curiosity. He had a curiosity that was not judging. He wanted to know the facts. And if we live with genuine curiosity, we can overcome a lot of the angst we have in our communication and the way that we develop and the way that we understand each other. There are times when all of us say things that are wrong and incorrect, but we have to realize that if we're saying it in a genuine way, with that full curiosity where we really want to know, there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. We can overcome those types of mistakes. So for me, I'm a true believer that you have to have that youthful curiosity for us to continue to move forward. And we have to have that as adults too. So we cannot be afraid to have dialogue, to communicate, and to share with one another and ask those hard questions.
It is apparent why you were so excited to speak to that. Thank you. Angela, do you want to go next? We'll just...
Sure, that's fine, yeah. For me, it's embracing differences and embracing culture. I mean, whether it be a communication person, whether it be a Hispanic person, whether it be someone from the LGBTQ community, whatever it is, we need to embrace those differences in cultures as we move forward. It's really going to help us understand different communities as we go forward. And it's just so important that our division, our department reflects that community, reflects all of those communities. And so I think we just got to get into that spirit of embracing the differences, embracing the cultures, and we're all going to be better off for that. So.
Thank you. Bill, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. As you know, I'm from North Dakota, not originally, and I previously did this work in Wyoming. And these are very different places than San Francisco or Salt Lake City. And if we were to only look at the communities around us and say, we're going to reflect those communities, I think we would be doing pretty well. In other words, that we look at age and background and gender, and we start to run into trouble here because we don't have the kind of diversity in education and where you went to school. In some of these states, we have one university, one. And over time, that has really been appealing, especially when we're hiring folks, to make sure that they're from the one university or from the state or from that neighborhood. And so what I would say about this is we need to look beyond our borders. We need to look beyond our world, and we need to say to ourselves, what are we missing? And then we need to go get it. And we need to attract that talent. We need to attract that conversation. We need to attract those values because we know that in the end, we don't have all the answers where we're from, and a lot of the answers that we need are outside of the world that we see. And if we can do that on a regular basis, again, having grown up in Los Angeles, it was a completely different circumstance. But now that I have started to discover, by the way, that greatness and beauty and amazing families that are in the middle of the country and these great legacy ranchers and family farmers and the people that feed us and their stories, they are incredible resources for us in delivering this important mission. But so many of them also recognize that there's more out there that we need to bring to bear to these states that may not necessarily be there. And so I was struck by intentionality, by the way. And that's, for me, a same kind of intentionality, but applied in a different world. And I think that's the one thing that is important.
That's a great answer, especially relevant for all of us in the current hiring choices that we're making. Thank you, Bill.
For me, I think the one thing would be trust. I truly believe that trust, we can have diversity, but if we don't trust, we don't get the benefits of diversity. You know, there's so much research about the benefits of diversity, but we're not going to get that benefit of collaboration and new ideas if we're not in a trusting environment. So one quick, real quick story, because I want to tell a football story, but I didn't play football. But in my program, I've created building trusted partnerships. There's 8 elements that we cover, and one of them is commitment. And when my son was in 7th grade, he decided to play tackle football for the first time. So all the pads, all the gears. It's August, it's hot, he's sweating. He's kind of overweight, big kid. I go and pick him up from practice one day, and he's like, "Mom, I decided I'm going to quit." And I said, "Oh, no, you're not." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, it's too hot, it's too hard. I'm going to quit." And I said, "No, you made a commitment. You're going to stay until the end of the season. And at the end of the season, if you never want to play again, you don't have to." And he looked at me and he said, "How come our family has to keep their commitments? None of my friends do." And I think that's keeping commitments. Unfortunately, it's not always the norm. And so I think being committed to creating intentional cultures, being committed that this isn't just a conversation that we have on stage, that this is the way that we do business, it's the way that we hire, it's the way that we treat people, that we're intentionally building a trusted environment where people are committed to diversion, to this, so that people feel safe and feel trust.
That's such a great example of parenting for grit. And I think it's really relevant to what you said earlier, too. I think the research shows that for startups, they do really well if everyone is similar. And that makes sense because they're working toward a vision, but that does not last for very long. The ones that actually succeed are the ones that become diverse. And it takes some grit and resilience to get through that process of building trust and learning and bringing different ideas to the table. That friction is important. So good for you and good for your son.
Real quick, I'll kind of dovetail on my good friend here. I have a concept which I really believe, and it's called failing forward. We as human beings, we're imperfect. We just are, even for as much as we try. And since I do so much work with small and minority and all kinds of wonderful businesses, you know, I really tell them as entrepreneurs, if you haven't made 100 mistakes in one day, you're just not trying hard enough. And those mistakes don't have to be big doozies. Of course, we don't want the big doozies to come along. But if you're small or large or a public agency, you must be committed to the process improvement track. Because in diversity, equity, inclusion, we are going to make mistakes. We are going to be trying new things, and that's a good thing. The only time that we don't learn something is when we win. If it's an easy win, you just sail along. But if you if you lose a bid, lose to somebody else, there's your opportunity to learn. And diversity, equity, inclusion, literally, we have to commit to that process improvement. It's not going to be perfect right from the very beginning.
That was a perfect dovetail, adding on that acceptance that there will be failure, there should be failure, and you'll get through it, you'll learn something, it'll get better. Thank you, Paul. All right, before we do this next question, I'm going to ask Bill to give a little bit of background. So in your programs, there's a copy of the WASHTO resolution on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I encourage you to take a look at it and read it if you haven't already. But I'm asking Bill to share the inside scoop on how that came to be and what its significance is.
Yeah, I'll be, from my perspective, and I only have one perspective, but I was part of some of the original conversations about it. It was developed with a conversation that started in the state of Washington, actually, with Roger and his teams, and there is a civil rights group and a policy team and some others that work inside of the WASHTO, ASHTO space. And then carried over to California and my good friend Tokes in California. And then at some point, and I don't know how it got to us, but it got to the Jim Bass, who was the president of WASHTO at the time, myself, who was vice president, Carlos was involved in the conversation, Tokes, Roger, of course, and we began the process of talking about this draft document that had been sort of developed, and we talked about, for me, I look at things not quite in a linear way. I try and look at it as more systemic, and so I'm thinking about this important document and thinking about how we can deliver it, how we can deliver it quickly, how we can deliver it on time. It was a very pragmatic thought, and certainly it was a given that it was important. It was a given that it was needed. It was a given that it was the right thing to do. I got, at least for me in my mind, I got past all of that right away and said, how do we actually make this happen for this small group and of people, and then the larger group at WASHTO, and so we came up with a strategy, and the strategy involved actually rewriting it so that it could touch really the diversity of the points of view in WASHTO, because remember, not all the states are the same. They were all different, and they were coming at this from a different approach. And remember, the success of it was everything. It was trying to get something over the line, trying to accomplish this one. It might seem small, but it was big for AASHTO and WASHTO. And without getting into too much detail, drafts were sent around, drafts were actually sent out to the other states, comments came back. Some were strong. Some were supportive. Some were, I don't want to say this because all the comments were important, but they weren't either strong or unimportant. I mean, they weren't unimportant or anything, but they just didn't change the document very much. And then we crafted it and recrafted it and recrafted it and finally put it out. And frankly, there wasn't agreement among all the states about what it was saying. And not the core stuff that we're talking about, because the values about diversity and equity and inclusion, that was all solid. And amongst all of the states, it was agreed upon that that was important. And it was important to make a statement about it. What the problem was were some of the words. And we moved the words, it was down to words. In some cases, one or two. And oftentimes in lawmaking, resolution building, collaboration, you guys all know this, right? It comes down to words. And we had to get through that. And I'm not sure we were, at the end of the day, all there, but it passed. And like most things that are hard, it just gets over the line. And it did. And once it got over the line, it fired up in some of the other regions. SASHTO was already working on their draft while we were working on ours, and then the other regions just picked it up, and then it became regionalized and then an AASHTO resolution. Sometimes small things matter, and it's focusing on the small things that is important to do to get it over the line. But it's all about the win and getting it over the line. And so we did.
And I'm so glad. And the reason I wanted you to share that is because, like you said, now that it's been accepted, now that it's been adopted, that is the direction for all of us. And that's not just for those of us who work at the WASHTO states. It's for all of us who are doing work on behalf of those states, as part of those states, as part of the communities that we're serving. And so I think a session is successful. A good measure is if people walk out of the room with something actionable, something that they can take away and they feel like they can do. So how might the people in this room make a difference, either immediately or in the long term, something that they can walk out and say, I could do that?
Do we know?
Yeah.
Quickly, in safety, we, as you all know, those that are practitioners in this space, integrate it into everything we do. We change a culture, our plans for safety are in all the other plans. They're in all the projects. They're in all the designs. They're in all of the programs. And that's what we need to do with DEI. It's the plan of plans. It's the plan inside of all of the other plans. It's in the projects, in the design, in the policies, in the programs, in the hiring, in the retention, in events like this. It's in everything. And once there, then that's a pretty good start. And then it evolves from there.
Thank you.
Just tying into that, one of my favorite quotes from this conference was when Natalie touched on this a little bit, and she said, "If you don't have an intentional plan, you are part of the problem." Yeah. I thought that was really good. For me, my thing is a mentoring program. There's so many ways that you can do it. If you want tips, call me. I would love to help you. But just by having some sort of a formal mentoring program where people feel like they have a contact, it helps them feel safe, it helps them feel like they have a direction and a path, I believe that's one thing that can be done, and I'd be happy to help you if you want some guidelines.
Well, actually, I've thought about this question quite a bit. And I don't know if you can tell, but I used to have a lot more hair up here. and each time I ever heard the phrase, I couldn't find this or that. I couldn't find a minority business. I couldn't find a woman-owned business. I would lose a strand of hair. I swear to God. And I would actually hope, I'm going to actually do a really, I've switched from going from output to outcomes. I really want to make sure that I reach out to as many people here as possible because there are so many amazing organizations that are dealing with diversity, equity, inclusion. Truly, top of the line organizations. And I really want to make sure that the community, which I represent, small business and everything, I want to make sure that we are a resource to you to help you identify those businesses, those employees, those geniuses who are out there who can really help impact, find solutions, provide value, and at very cost-effective savings. So thank you. I really hope to connect with everybody.
I like the fact that we've talked about having DE&I, and there's also belonging and access as part of the DNA. I think that's really critical. A couple of ways to do that is to be courageous, and each and every one of us can be courageous when we leave this room to say that I'm going to do something somehow, some way. I may not know how that's going to be, but I'm going to be part of the solution. And through that courageousness, we also have to be resilient because there are going to be factions that push back on you and make you feel uncomfortable, make you question what you're doing. But to be resilient means you will overcome that. You will be strong enough to say, this is important. We have to do these things. And when you're doing those things, make sure that you understand as individuals when you leave here, it's okay to know that we don't know something. And we have to be willing to admit that, and that helps us to be able to move forward. So I would say being courageous and also being resilient are the two things that you can really take away with you and grow from.
Well, in the spirit of what Terry Newell said, talking threes yesterday, and I guess Natalie Goffner did, I missed that, but I wanted to say that doing nothing is not an option, okay? And we all need to do something. You just touched on it. We all can do something, and just doing nothing is not an option. And then I want to get back to intentionality a little bit. We need to intentionally focus on this. You look at all the different things we focus on as engineering. This is important. Let's focus on it. And so intentional focus is what I'd like to say there. And then the third one was just getting back to our customers at the end of the day, guys, is the public, and we just need to move at the speed of trust and develop ourselves internally as we work with them externally, and really develop that trust that we have. And I think it has to be intentional and it has to be focused. So.
Thank you. Well, I think every single one of these people separately said, oh, I could talk about this for hours. And we collectively agreed that they would be very quick because we wanted to leave time for questions, because this is all about dialogue. So we're going to open up the floor for questions, and I don't know if we've got someone with a mic, but I'll come run around because I've been doing that. So don't hold back. We've got 15 minutes.
Question right here front.
you have a loud voice? Okay. Why don't you go ahead while I grab a mic?
You want one of these?
Yeah.
Please bring them.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
He's going to get my steps.
Well, kind of save the question for the mic, but first of all, awesome panel, like ridiculous. What's really painful about this, though, is you sit and look at this panel and you wonder why we have to talk about it so much. Why is this not the team always? I mean, it's just making it really obvious, I guess, is what I'm trying to say to you. So wonderful, wonderful panel, wonderful discussion. A couple things definitely keyed in on me. I'm wondering if, especially being intentional, K through 12, can we make change in 15 years? Because it's a blink of an eye as we get old. I know it's nuts. But I wonder, is there a parallel, or is there hope, I guess is what I really mean. I feel like bullying as a topic seems to have been snuffed out in fairly short time. Maybe I'm being naive. I don't know. I'm kind of listening to my kids, and it's almost like bullying is a thing that's now on a movie or a TV, and it's really not reality anymore. Now, did that just shift to social bullying? Like, has it, tweaked? Or am I just naive and, like, minorities? And still, it's alive and well, Drew. Like, don't kid yourself. But it feels like we made real progress in bullying, and that was very intentional, and they pounded it into the kids. Is that a parallel? Is there hope that if we were intentional, that we really could sniff some of these things out? Or am I just being naive? Does that make sense?
It does to me. I think there is a parallel there. When you work at something, you get production. And when you have a focus on something, results come based on that focus. And when the bullying campaigns, and it's still going on, so bullying hasn't gone anywhere, even for adults. But when you really focus on something and you get buy-in at every single level and it's driven by leadership, you get results. And that's what diversity, inclusion, and equity has to be, is a driven mechanism from leadership. And when leadership leads in the proper ways, others will follow. And then you start to see the positive results. And we hope one day, my hope in my Pollyanna world, is that these conversations are few and far between. And in 15 years, I don't know if we'll get there. We've been working on this for 400 some odd years. So we got a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm hoping that we see those types of parallels continue to grow, and we start to see these issues dissipate because they're no longer the norm.
Well, I'll give you just a smidge of silver lining also. I'm in the technology world. I work for Autodesk. And so, again, maybe that's a luxury of, where we're headquartered, Silicon Valley, a little bit different, progressive thinking. But we've just seen a ton of effort on it, and it seems to be trickling through in, what could be considered a short amount of time, 5, 8 years, of a lot of effort. Culture is really our top thing from management. So, to your point, if we want to do it, we could do it. I mean, we could do something at least, get halfway there, right? I mean, yeah. Sorry, thanks.
Did any of you want to add? Should we keep the
I would
questions
just add that I'm optimistic. I mean, that was part of your question, right? I absolutely believe that we can make a difference. And if everybody in this room, I loved his idea of taking courage. If everybody in this room just does one thing, then we're that much closer. And that's the way it needs to happen.
And I want to say, in the not-too-distant past, about a year and a half ago, in downtown San Francisco at a construction project, a noose was hung on a construction site. One would think San Francisco's so wonderful. No, San Francisco has its issues as well. And I think the takeaway for me, because I think we have had some very marked successes in areas around bullying, but I think the marvelous thing about what happened when it became everybody's top of mind was a redefinition of exactly what bullying is. I don't think some people absolutely understood that they were actually being a bully. Right. And I think it raised our awareness, and then we became intentional about it. But then the other thing, I think the next horizon needs to be what I call the unconscious bias. I know that I absolutely challenge myself every day, whether it's in the car.
And that's different than bullying.
Correct, but I mean it's the same base.
I got you.
Yeah. So I agree with you that I think we've made some significant strides. I will just say myself, we all can make additional improvements. But thank you.
All right, I know there are questions. Who's next?
If you don't ask questions, we sing, and you don't want that.
We sing. Yeah,
Paul will sing with you.
that's hilarious. Question in the back there. Thank you for asking it.
This is going to be a tough question for you. As a straight white male, I feel sometimes I've been marked as public enemy number one. What would you say to someone like me who's concerned that even if I'm the most qualified for a position, that I would be overlooked because I don't fit the definition of diversity?
It sounds like it is. Go for it.
So I'm going to answer that really honestly. Because I've actually found some instances in the past couple years, I'm a white gay male. And I actually find myself in a different position within my own community where, from perceptions and where the community is going and so forth, is that the white gay males are kind of at the bottom of the pecking order. And, that kind of feels kind of awkward. And I'm like, well, we're all connected. Why does there need to be a hierarchy within a community? It's almost like kind of a slice of a slice of a slice. So I guess what I would say to that is and we work with small businesses, which are, white male-owned, straight white male-owned businesses. And there are so many challenges we all have to make to be competitive in the marketplace, in our businesses, in our personal lives. I think it's just a personal journey, and I always coach people to say that we must have to take what is given to us. Sometimes we're up, sometimes we're down, and I think it's just about that constant improvement and putting our best foot forward. And if it's in business, that we are really a competitive perspective. But from the personal perspective, I just find myself constantly always trying to strive to increase my universe, increase my network, and spread what I know to be my truth, which is we're all valuable. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I live my life.
Can I weigh in a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, and I want to thank you for bringing that question up, because I hear that quite often in the trainings that I do. I would hope that any position that was open was vetted. The individuals that were trying to get that position was vetted for the best qualified individual, because I know that people that are minoritized and people of color and everything else, they don't want anything given to them that they have not earned or they are not qualified for. And that's a misnomer that sometimes circulates in our communities. And we also have to maintain an understanding that to some semblance, and in some way, shape, manner, or form, we are all diverse. And we can't forget that. We all have something about us that's different from the other person next to us. And we hear these narratives on a regular basis, but I always come back to tell people, I say, well, if you have a fully inclusive and an entity or a company that you're working for that understands diversity, inclusion, and equity, those types of things won't happen, because it's based on the qualities of that individual that they're bringing to the table. And that's all anybody wants, is to be valued for being the full, productive individual that they are. And I'm hoping that that case hasn't happened to you.
So I wanted to, if you asked, I wouldn't want to offer advice if it wasn't asked for, but if we were not in front of a group of people and we were just talking, and you brought that question to me, and the way I reacted when you first, asked the question, thank you, by the way, for doing that, would be to say to find your grace in not just, and I wrote a note down, by the way, this panel is inspiring. And so as I'm hearing things, I'm writing them down in my notepad. She's watching me, right. But one of the things I wrote down here was find your grace. And it's applicable here because it's not finding your grace just in yourself, which is really important. It's finding your grace in these others, the other people that are around you, the other people that are making these decisions. Find your grace in them. The people that did get the job, find your grace in them. And if you do that in all these situations, if you're always projecting that, especially as a white male, finding your grace is really important and extending that into others, always, with everyone, in every conversation. So in that particular instance, I would tell you to find your grace.
I'd like to add one comment to that because it's a great question. I know it's out there. If you switch that thinking a little bit and you position yourself to be part of the solution and the moving forward, your stock goes up incredibly.
Yes.
There is no more fighting over positions. I mean, this is ridiculous, right?
Yes.
You be part of the change, and it all happens around you. We see it day in, day out. You can apply it to other ideas and doing work and working hard, not working your buddies, and whatever it is, right? That's how you raise your own value.
Yes.
It's not off the back of others or opportunities lost by others or, this kind of thing. So anyways, personal to me, and I appreciate it.
Good question. No, thank you.
Just one comment I have real quick. There's a study that I was reading, and it was talking about actually creating this plan. How do we do it? What are some of the things that we can do? And a couple of the larger companies, their part of their plan was to, when they were hiring in a new position, to interview 3 people and to identify if it's women or people of color that are not typically getting that interview, to make sure they get the interview. But then part of the plan is we're always selecting the best candidate once we have those interviews. And I think that's an important message, is that we want people to have the opportunity to get to the table, but we're still selecting the best person for the position.
That's great.
That's similar to the Rooney Rule.
Well, I just want to add to one thing that I really appreciate about my job is when we're sitting around the table with our leadership team, Carlos is the only man at the table. He has surrounded himself by women, and that was because those were the right people for the job. But that didn't happen overnight. That's because investments have been made and continue to be made in women in our organization. And so this is the payoff of lots of years of intentionality of giving those opportunities to women. And that's one reason I think that the K-12 approach is so important, is because then everyone has the opportunity to be the most qualified, whereas that hasn't always been the case.
Yes.
Can I just add one really quick story?
Yes, please.
Because it just, and I shared this earlier, but we were doing, Build Out California was doing a pilot program with San Luis Obispo, which is a great school for producing construction managers, architects, engineers, construction services. And we did a pilot listening session. And so after we were finished talking about all the wonderful things we were going to help these students with, who happened to be 5 students in STEM and construction services, 4 of them were women, and 1 was a male, all from the LGBT community. And finally, one woman stepped forward. She said, "Paul, this is all really great, but can you just park that to the side? Because really my issue is the challenges I have as a woman in engineering. Can we just start there? Because it's hard enough for me on a daily basis to really keep up and hold my head high and act with grace in an industry which is predominant by men." And I just had to really check myself at the door, and it had such an impact on me that it goes back to our own personal awareness that, goodness, here I thought I was on this holy mission, and I realized I was kind of there, but no, I really needed to be helping here first. So, but it really became self-checking at the door, process improvement, and realized, oh goodness, I had a huge blind spot. And those blind spots become so huge. So that was my lesson learned that day.
Thank you. We've got one more. 1 minute. All right, you guys, this is your chance. Any final words?
I just wanted to add to your comment there. That's a great example of intersectionality. When we are looking at the intersections that we have and the impacts we have along each crossroads in those intersections, we have a great opportunity to create change. And if we consider that when we're making our decisions during the course of the day, great things start to happen. But it takes that consciousness and awareness of those intersections. If you're a woman, LGBTQ woman, you could be a minority LGBTQ woman. You could be a minority LGBTQ woman that is handicapped or disabled. Those intersections all start to come into play, and we have to consider them when we're working with people and understand that, those of us that have opportunities to contribute to their success, that we do so in a way that's conducive to helping them feel valued. So I think that intersection is a big thing for us to constantly think about on a regular basis as well. And we forget how many of those intersections take place. For the gentleman that asked that question about being a white male, there's other intersections. You're a white male, and from where are you from? From Salt Lake. He's a white male from Salt Lake. He may live in, West Valley City. It doesn't matter where that is. But he also may be someone that has neural deficiencies. That's another intersection. Those are things that we don't always see when we're dealing with people, and we have to be conscious of that when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there can be so many different things that come into play, and that's what I'm hoping that today you leave with, is understanding that this is a vast space that we're in right now, and we're having this conversation where none of us have the ability to take our thumb and put our thumb on it and have control. We're still all learning in this journey. And it's important that we understand that. And we don't feel bad about this journey. We don't feel like we're not being successful. We just have to stay on the path and continue to try to grow. And that's one of the most important things we can do today.
That takes us right up to the end of an hour, and I think that that's a beautiful note to end on. All right. Well, thank you all for participating. This has been a fantastic conversation, and thank you to all of you who stuck around to listen.